Welcome everyone to Transitional Justice on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host for today, Laura Rubio. Joining me is our guest, Gerald Gahima, expert in transitional justice. Today, we're going to talk about universal jurisdiction, the legal principle that, when invoked by a country or international organization, allows them to criminally prosecute individuals regardless of where they live or where the alleged crime occurred. Our guest for today, Dr. Gahima, was central to the rebuilding of Rwanda's justice system in the aftermath of the 1994 genocide. He will talk about the lessons from how Rwanda sought justice for the genocide that might be relevant to the situation in Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Gerald, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for hosting me.
Yes, of course. Thank you. You're a repeat guest, and it's always lovely to hear you. So to start our conversation today, could you please give us a quick refresher of the genocide in Rwanda before we get into the way justice was sought after it? I would like us all to start on the same page.
Okay. Rwanda is a small country in Central Africa, very small, 26,000 square kilometers. But it has become notorious because of the genocide that happened in 1994. So although it's a small country, it's a country with a rich history. For about the past 6 centuries, it was ruled by a monarchy. The country has 3 kind of ethnic groups. The majority are called Hutus. They're about 85%. A minority of about 14-15% called Tutsis, and a very tiny minority called Tutwas. Power has changed hands between the Hutus and the Tutsis, between the large majority and the small minority. Mm-hmm. So the small minority, the Tutsi, historically dominated the country socially and politically. But in 1959, the colonial government, the Belgians, changed their policies. Instead of supporting the minority, they supported the Hutu majority to take over power. And that change of power was followed by large-scale violence against the Tutsi minority, and a large number of Tutsis fled the country and went to exile. And the policy of the new government was that the Tutsis, the country was small, it was overpopulated, they should not think of coming back. So fast forward, after about 30 years, 35 years in exile, that small minority armed themselves and invaded the country from a neighboring country, Uganda. And so there was a civil war in Rwanda between 1990 and 1994. The majority-dominated government decided that to solve the problem of the Tutsi minority once and for all, they should exterminate the Tutsi minority who are in the country. And that's the genesis of the genocide. So literally, 75% of the Tutsi who are in Rwanda between 1990 and 1994, they were killed between April and July 1994. And it was horrendous violence. So estimates are that somewhere between 750 and 1 million people died. The strange thing about the Rwanda conflict is that although the Tutsi lost most of their people, they won the military conflict and they set up the government. So they had a free hand to decide what to do in terms of accountability for the genocide, it's very rare. Usually, rarely do victims ever have a say on how justice for crimes against them should be held accountable. And that's what happened in Rwanda. So Rwanda had the opportunity to decide how to punish the genocide because the victims won, in quotation marks, won the military conflict. It's difficult to see how you can say you won a conflict when 3/4 of your people have died.
Yes, of course. But that's very interesting. So that gave us gave the minority the opportunity to set up the government and the justice system afterwards, right?
Right.
Okay, and so how does universal jurisdiction come into the picture?
Okay, I'll start by telling you of the different things that we tried.
Okay.
First, the victims were very, of course, after every atrocity, there's very deep hunger for justice. So the victims were insistent on having those responsible for the genocide punished. And they were saying, all we want is to have these people punished according to the law. The problem was that the Rwanda genocide was unique in the sense that it was a mass atrocity in which ordinary people participated in committing atrocities. So when you think of the Holocaust, for example, you had an army of the Nazis that was rounding up Jews and taking them to concentration camps and killing them. There were also a lot of ordinary people who were sympathetic to the Nazis, but were not necessarily involved in the killings. The unique thing about Rwanda is that it's ordinary people, it's not armed, it's not largely armed people, although some soldiers committed killings. It was not the soldiers who committed most of the killings. It was civilians, neighbors killing neighbors, literally with their bare hands or with machetes or clubs. So in every village, every day, people woke up for 3 months and they said they were going to work. And by meaning they were going to work, it meant they were going to look for people to kill. So we ended up with a country full of many, many people, tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people who had participated in committing atrocities. So it was a big challenge because no legal system is designed to try mass participation in atrocities. And we were advised that maybe we should try something like truth commissions, like what has happened in South Africa and other countries. But victims were very insistent that no, they wanted people to be punished according to the law. So we started out by trying to prosecute everyone according to the criminal code. But we soon realized that it was not feasible because it was estimated, like, for example, when I was the prosecutor general, we had like just 130,000 people in prison. And those are the people we have in custody. So the number of cases we're investigating were even larger. And we were not, every year, we are not even completing 3,000 trials. So it was estimated it would take maybe 200,000 to complete the trials. So we started thinking of other alternatives. And that's when we thought of a second option. And that was gacaca, which are gacaca courts, which are basically courts manned by lay people. In every village, they set up a court of laymen to judge these cases. That itself has its own problems, but it could try more people than the ordinary criminal justice courts. Thirdly, the United Nations had also said the Rwanda genocide took place after the conflict in the former Yugoslavia, and the United Nations had set up the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. So the Security Council, the UN Security Council, had no option but to set up a similar court for Rwanda. So, and that was the third plank of our justice processes. And it has mainly dealt with high-level people, politicians, military people, journalists, and other civil society leaders.
So the high-level people were judged in the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda.
Yes.
While everyone else was judged in the gacaca courts by local people. So how were the local people for the gacaca courts selected?
In every village, people meet and elect what they call people of integrity, 12 of them in every village, and they have upright levels. The least serious offenses are dealt with at a village court, and then there is an intermediate court, and there's a court that is like the final court of appeal for those courts. But it's all within the community.
And is it also within both groups of citizens?
Yes, in theory, yes. The problem with gacaca courts is that, first of all, the majority of the killings were committed by some people from the Hutu community. But you can imagine that everyone, because there was mass participation in committing atrocities, you can imagine that every family has someone who participated in committing killings. Mm-hmm. And it's difficult to get family members, friends, relatives to deal honestly, fairly, impartially with crimes against people, with whom they are related. So there has been a reluctance on the part of the majority of the Hutu population to face up to the crimes that were committed by relatives, friends, and acquaintances. But there is also another problem that made gacaca difficult to be effective. Although the Hutu community, some members of the community committed atrocities, the victors also committed some human rights violations, not of a genocidal nature, but they committed some crimes, serious human rights violations against members of the Hutu community. And the current government, did not want the crimes of its own soldiers to be tried. So the Hutu community, most of their members, they feel grievances. They feel that what has happened is victors' justice. It tries the crimes that were committed against the Tutsis, but it does not address their own grievances and their own suffering. And that made many people reluctant to participate willingly in gacaca courts.
So that was a shortcoming of the gacaca courts that wasn't fixed. So that's a shortcoming that is still okay.
A very big shortcoming, and it has lasting consequences. Because these kinds of grievances, they don't die. Memories, time does not heal wounds. The grievances fester for generations. I remember when I was in the former Yugoslavia in Bosnia, reading statements of Bosnian women who were raped by Serbians. Mm-hmm. Now, Serbians are Orthodox. Apparently, some 600 years ago, the Serbs, Muslims, Ottoman Turks, committed crimes. And 600 years later, people in Bosnia were committing crimes against Bosnians. And in the course of committing those crimes, they would refer to the crimes that were committed 600 years ago. So even in Rwanda, it's obvious that unless the grievances of the majority Hutu are addressed, they will continue to grieve and to seek justice, and there will be no closure.
I see. And how is it that the Tutsi minority was able to win this conflict and set up the courts and the justice afterwards?
I think, I don't know why the Tutsi, by the way, full disclosure, I happen to be Tutsi myself. I can't say why the Tutsi won. Maybe because when you have your back, I mean, when you have no choice but to fight to survive, you either win or you perish.
Well, yeah. That's a strong answer, of course. Okay, and that brings us into the way that universal jurisdiction played a role, both, I don't know, in the Gacaca courts and in the International Criminal Tribunal, was it?
Yes. Okay, so the reason Gacaca international criminal law and universal jurisdiction became necessary is that when the government that was responsible for the genocide was defeated, it fled the country. Its whole army, its civil service, its judiciary, they were totally uprooted. They left the country, and they incited the majority of the population to leave the country. Half the country left and went to neighboring countries. Most of the refugees did come back, but the people who bore the greatest responsibility never came back, because obviously they knew that if they came back, they would be held accountable. So they went and fled to other countries. Those who bore the greatest responsibility even changed their names, went into hiding. But as I said, the UN had set up a court that was trying these crimes, and there were also civil society organizations in different countries that were following up some of the persons who are suspected of participating in committing atrocities. So universal jurisdiction became important because the people who were responsible for the genocide were no longer within our national jurisdiction. And our justice system had been destroyed. Judges had either been killed or they had fled the country. We were rebuilding. Obviously, our justice system had shortcomings. So countries were unwilling to send accused persons to us because they thought that we could not give them fair trial. First, because we do not have credible justice systems, and two, because they thought we were biased. We would not be able to deal with their cases impartially. So other states were more comfortable to try them than turn them over to us. So even if we had wanted them, we could not have got them because other nations would not have trusted us to punish them, to try their cases fairly.
So they took it upon themselves under the principle of universal jurisdiction to prosecute for these crimes that are far away.
Initially, most countries were actually content to do nothing. They will not try them, but they will not even hand them to us. And this is where I think the lesson of Rwanda offers, the experience of Rwanda offers lessons for Ukraine. Because countries were not willing to try these people, it's very expensive to be able to try these people. You would have to spend your own money, your own national budget, to send investigators to Rwanda and to investigate the cases. Now, we were talking of hundreds of thousands of refugees in many countries. We were talking of crimes that had killed 1 million people. It would take a large budget to investigate these crimes, and many countries were not willing to spend that kind of money. And it was not just a question of money. Some countries were sympathetic to the previous regime. They were allies of the people who had been ousted from power.
Yeah.
Two,
there wasn't a political interest in prosecuting.
There was no political interest. And two, human rights violations in small countries do not really invite a lot of passion in some countries. So So what if Africans are killing one another? It's what they do. And there was an unwillingness to address these crimes. But what happened was that there were civil society groups, either made of Rwandese in the diaspora or human rights activists in different countries, who took it upon themselves to investigate these crimes and to advocate for the bringing to justice of some of these people. So civil society played a role in forcing the hand of governments to investigate some of these crimes. And it did not always succeed. For example, for a long time, France, where most of the people who had run away from Rwanda, most members of the former regime had settled in France, it was not willing to deal with these cases. But because of pressure from civil society groups, finally, even in France, some action has been taken.
And is the action taken locally in France and other countries, or is the universal jurisdiction being applied through the international tribunal?
First was applied through the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. That one indicted over 90 people. There were over 66 convictions, comprising a full range of people, military officers, government ministers, journalists, priests, nuns, civil society leaders. So initially it started off badly, but I think it did a good job towards its end. It's now in its residual phase. The other countries that have done trials in their own countries, I think the country that has tried the most people is Belgium. Mm-hmm. And there have also been trials in Germany, in Norway, in Sweden, in Finland. Yes. And there have also been some immigration proceedings relying on the crimes of genocide in the United States and Canada. So those are some of the countries where some of the people responsible for the Rwanda genocide have been tried and punished. And some countries, instead of trying these people after the immigration proceedings, they actually deport those people to be tried in criminal courts in Rwanda.
Okay, so some big players. And then coming back to the Ukraine conflict, how would these lessons learned from Rwanda and these type of justice apply in such a different conflict? Because it's not a national conflict, but an international one with players from two different countries. So how would these experiences apply?
Okay. So the big problem, for example, you've recently heard that, there was an indictment against Putin.
Yeah.
There will obviously be future indictments against military officers in the Russian army. But the problem with the International Criminal Court, with the International Criminal Justice, is that the state parties, the court has no police. It has no enforcement powers. It relies on the UN Security Council, of which Russia is a member. So it's very unlikely that there will ever be an enforceable decision to bring Russian officers and politicians to court before the ICC. Mm-hmm. But people travel. So there may be Russians who travel to other countries in Western Europe. There are many Russians who have invested, who have homes, who have businesses, and who may travel as tourists to other countries. So if the Ukrainians can build cases against all the people in Russia whom they believe have hand in the crimes that have been committed, they should build a database have these cases ready, and of course use the intelligence capacity to trace the location of these people, just in case they happen to be outside Russian jurisdiction.
But once they are, why not extradite them back to Ukraine for prosecution instead of applying universal jurisdiction? Or what would be the advantage of applying universal jurisdiction within another country to prosecute these people?
The reason is that Russia is a major superpower. In spite of, like Western countries, they've thrown their weight behind Ukraine, but you don't see the kind of support that Western countries have given to Ukraine in other parts of the region. Definitely in Africa, in Asia, most countries have been reluctant to throw their weight behind Ukraine, in spite of its just cause. So I think it will be unlikely for countries in Africa and in Asia. I don't know about Latin America, but definitely in Africa and Asia, I don't see many countries willing to extradite Russians to Ukraine. But I think it would be much easier to get these people to extradite them to countries that have universal jurisdiction. And anyway, we are not even talking about extradition. We are talking of countries that find these people within their own borders.
Yeah, exactly. And then prosecute within the borders instead of sending them back to
if you
Ukraine.
find them in your own country, you prosecute them.
Instead of sending them back to Ukraine to be prosecuted.
Instead of sending them to Ukraine.
Okay. So do you think this is a better option for Ukraine instead of trying to prosecute as many people as they can within their own court system, considering also that at least before the war, they have a pretty strong justice system. So maybe they would be willing and able to prosecute many war criminals.
I think Ukraine would be able and willing to try those whatever Russians it could get its hands on fairly. But I think that there would be little political will in many countries to surrender Russians to Ukraine. That's the major.
So under the idea that the prosecuted Russian would receive a fairer trial outside of Ukraine in a universal jurisdiction country, right?
Even outside Ukraine, I don't know how many countries would be. I think that if people were in Canada, in the United States, in Western Europe, if Russians were in those countries, I think these countries would be willing to try them. Yeah. Outside North America and Western Europe, I don't know how many countries are willing to face the wrath of Russia in trying Russians for the crimes that have been committed in Ukraine.
Both in trying them or in sending them back to another country to be prosecuted, right? But in any case, justice really must be sought for the atrocities in Ukraine. And this is one of the roads that might be followed to achieve that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Gerald. This was super interesting, very enlightening. Thank you for all the explanations. We're sadly out of time. So any last conclusions you want to include?
No, really what I need to stress is that getting justice for these crimes is a long-term process, and Ukrainians should prepare for that long process. Civil society plays a strong role in following up such crimes. So civil society in countries where Russians may end up being present should work to help the cause of justice for the victims of the crimes that are being committed in Ukraine today.
Yeah, and civil society organizations also today investigating and keeping information that might be used in these trials later is a powerful move that can be made right now.
Right.
To make it easier later on. Well, many thanks and aloha, everyone. We will be back in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.